The moment Sarah Evans watched Marcus hurriedly collect his belongings from her company's lobby, she knew she'd made a terrible mistake. The truth hit her like a physical blow. The man she'd just fired wasn't just her temporary driver. He was the same person who had saved her life 15 years ago, disappearing before she could ever thank him. If you're enjoying this incredible journey of fate and second chances, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories that remind us how unexpectedly life can come full circle. Sarah Evans straightened her tailored blazer as she surveyed the Chicago skyline from her corner office. At 38, she had everything most people dreamed of: CEO of Evans Technologies, a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, and a reputation as one of the most formidable businesswomen in the Midwest. What she didn't have was time. Her regular driver had taken emergency leave, and her assistant had hired a temporary replacement for today's crucial investor meetings across the city. "Ms. Evans, your driver is here," her assistant announced through the intercom. Sarah collected her portfolio and strode to the elevator. She didn't have time to vet whoever they'd sent, they just needed to be competent enough to get her through Chicago traffic on time. In the lobby stood a man in his early 40s, wearing a simple black suit that had seen better days. His posture was straight, but something in his eyes spoke of exhaustion. "Marcus Wilson, ma'am," he said, extending his hand. "I'll be your driver today." Sarah barely looked at him, giving his hand a quick shake while scanning emails on her phone. "We need to make 4 stops today, starting with Monroe Street. I have calls scheduled during transit, so I'll need silence." "Of course, Ms. Evans." The black town car was immaculate, and Marcus held the door with practiced ease. Sarah settled into the back seat, already dialing her first call. "The first meeting is at Lakeside Partners. I need to be there in 20 minutes, she said before turning her attention to her phone. Marcus nodded silently and pulled into the morning traffic. The car moved smoothly through the crowded streets as Sarah conducted her calls. She barely registered the man driving, but in the brief silences between conversations, she noticed how he anticipated traffic patterns, taking small side streets to avoid congestion. They arrived at her first meeting with 5 minutes to spare. "I'll be approximately 45 minutes, she said, gathering her things. "I'll be right here, Ms. Evans." Throughout the morning, Marcus proved remarkably efficient. He had coffee waiting when she emerged from her second meeting, noting she hadn't brought any from the office. The gesture surprised her, but she took it without comment and moved on to her next appointment. It wasn't until midday, when her phone died unexpectedly, that Sarah found herself without her usual buffer. The silence in the car felt suddenly awkward. "How long have you been driving?" she asked, more to fill the silence than genuine interest. Marcus glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Professionally? Just a few months. The agency is temporary work while I look for something more permanent." Sarah nodded, her attention drifting to the passing buildings. "Your company, Evans Technologies, it's done impressive work with renewable energy solutions," Marcus commented. "The solar integration systems you've developed have changed the industry." Sarah raised an eyebrow, surprised. Most temporary drivers didn't follow corporate innovations. "You're familiar with our work?" A slight smile crossed Marcus's face. "I try to stay informed. Before my circumstances changed, I worked in engineering." Something in his tone made Sarah actually look at him, really look at him for the first time. His hands on the steering wheel were calloused but steady. His eyes, visible in the mirror, held intelligence and something else she couldn't quite place. "What kind of engineering?" she asked. "Environmental systems design. I specialized in water purification technologies for developing countries." Sarah sat up straighter. This wasn't the conversation she expected to have with a car service driver. "What happened?" Marcus's shoulders tensed slightly. "Life. A divorce. Then my daughter got sick, leukemia. I needed flexible hours for her treatments, and engineering firms aren't known for their flexibility. So here I am, driving when she's in school or with her grandmother, taking whatever work I can get. The simple honesty of his statement hung in the air between them. Sarah felt a strange discomfort, not with him, but with herself for her dismissive attitude earlier. "I'm sorry about your daughter." "Is she?" "She's in remission, thank God," Marcus said, his voice softening. "Emma's 10 now. Toughest person I know." The car stopped at a red light, and Marcus reached for his wallet, flipping it open to show a picture of a smiling girl with bright eyes and a colorful headscarf. "She's beautiful," Sarah said sincerely. "She's my world." The light changed, and they continued toward Sarah's next meeting. Something nagged at Sarah's memory, something about Marcus seemed vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place it. Before she could consider it further, they arrived at her destination. "This meeting might run long," she warned. "At least 2 hours." Marcus nodded. "No problem. I've got a book." When Sarah emerged 2.5 hours later, she was tense and irritated. The investors had been difficult, questioning her company's latest projections. She slid into the back seat with a deep sigh. "Rough meeting?" Marcus asked, catching her eye in the mirror. "Nothing I can't handle," she replied automatically. "Of course not. You've built an empire from the ground up. These momentary setbacks are just that, momentary." Sarah paused, struck by his confidence in her abilities. "You seem to know a lot about me and my company." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "As I said, I follow the industry. Your rise has been remarkable." There was something in his tone, admiration, yes, but also something else. "Familiarity?" "Where to next?" he asked, changing the subject. "Actually, I need to stop somewhere off schedule. Do you know the Children's Memorial Hospital?" Marcus's eyes widened slightly in the mirror. "Very well. My daughter spent a lot of time there during her treatment." "I'm on the board," Sarah explained. "I try to visit at least once a week when I can. We've just funded a new oncology wing, and I want to check on the progress." The hospital was bustling with activity when they arrived. Sarah turned to Marcus. "This might take an hour. You can take a break if you'd like." Marcus hesitated. "Actually, if it's all right with you, I might come in briefly. My daughter's favorite nurse still works here, and I've been meaning to drop off a thank you gift." Sarah nodded. "Of course." They walked together through the familiar corridors, an unlikely pair. Sarah in her designer suit, Marcus in his driver's uniform. At the oncology floor, they parted ways, Sarah to meet with the hospital director, Marcus to find Nurse Chen. An hour later, Sarah was heading back to the lobby when she passed the children's playroom. Inside, she spotted Marcus sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by young patients. He was reading a story, his voice animated, the children giggling at his character impressions. Among them was a small boy with no hair and a feeding tube, laughing so hard he had to hold his stomach. Sarah stood transfixed, watching this man, who hours ago had just been an anonymous driver, transform the room with his presence. The children clearly adored him. When the story ended, Marcus high-fived each child before standing to leave. He spotted Sarah in the doorway and looked momentarily embarrassed. "Sorry, I got sidetracked," he said, joining her. "Don't apologize," she replied. "You're good with them." "Practice," he shrugged. "When Emma was in treatment, I read to her every day. Then to her roommates, then to the whole floor eventually. It was the one thing I could do when I felt powerless." As they walked toward the exit, a nurse called out, "Mr. Wilson. Will you be at the fundraiser next month? The kids are counting on your puppet show." Marcus waved back. "Wouldn't miss it, Denise." Sarah gave him a questioning look as they reached the car. "I volunteer here," he explained, opening her door. "Twice a month, more when I can manage it." "Even with your schedule?" Working multiple jobs? Marcus smiled. Some things you make time for, no matter what. The afternoon continued with Sarah's final meeting. Throughout, she found herself thinking about Marcus, his circumstances, his devotion to his daughter, his volunteer work. Something about him continued to nag at her memory, but she couldn't place it. As they headed back to her office at day's end, Sarah made a decision. Marcus, do you have a minute before your next client? I'd like to speak with you in my office. Surprise flickered across his face. Of course. Upstairs, Sarah directed him to sit across from her desk. Your background is in environmental engineering, specifically water purification? Marcus nodded, looking confused. Yes, for about 15 years. Evans Technologies has a growing water technology division. We're developing systems for drought-affected regions globally. We need experienced engineers. She pulled out a business card, writing a name on the back. This is our HR director. Call her tomorrow, mention my name. We offer flexible scheduling for parents, including remote work options when needed. Marcus stared at the card, speechless. I can't promise anything, Sarah continued, but with your experience, I believe you'd be valuable to our team. And the salary would certainly be better than driving. Marcus looked up, his eyes suspiciously bright. Ms. Evans, why would you do this? Sarah considered the question. I believe in recognizing talent and character when I see it. And clearly, you have both. Marcus took the card carefully, as if it might disappear. Thank you. This is unexpected. Don't thank me yet. You'll still need to interview properly, prove your qualifications. Of course, he nodded. I wouldn't expect special treatment. As Marcus stood to leave, Sarah's phone rang. She answered quickly, distracted by an urgent matter from her assistant. When she looked up again, Marcus was gone, but he'd left something on her desk, a small folded piece of paper. Sarah opened it, finding a child's drawing of a superhero with the words, "Thanks for helping my dad." Emma, written in crayon. The gesture touched her unexpectedly. She tucked the drawing into her portfolio and returned to work, the day's events settling into the background as new crises demanded her attention. It wasn't until hours later, working late in her empty office, that Sarah remembered something that had been bothering her all day. Marcus had said he knew the hospital well because of his daughter, but he'd navigated the complex building without hesitation, greeting several staff members by name. It suggested he spent considerable time there beyond just his daughter's treatment. On impulse, Sarah pulled up the hospital's website on her computer. Under Community Support, she found a page dedicated to volunteers. And there he was, Marcus Wilson, listed as a 5-year volunteer who had contributed over 1,000 hours of service and raised nearly $50,000 through organizing various fundraisers for children's cancer research. Sarah sat back, impressed. This man who had been driving her around all day was far more than he appeared. Still, something else nagged at her, something about his face, especially his eyes, seemed hauntingly familiar. She searched her emails for the temporary agency's information. Perhaps his resume would explain why he seemed familiar. She found the agency's contact and dialed. This is Sarah Evans. I had a driver today, Marcus Wilson. I need his contact information for a follow-up. One moment, Ms. Evans, the receptionist replied. After a brief pause, she returned. I'm sorry, but Mr. Wilson has requested we not share his personal information. However, I can take a message. That won't be necessary, Sarah replied, frustrated. Can you at least tell me how long he's been with your agency? Mr. Wilson registered with us 3 months ago, but today was his first assignment. He specifically requested to be assigned to Evans Technologies if possible. Sarah froze. He requested my company specifically? Yes, ma'am. Is there a problem? No, Sarah said slowly. No problem. Thank you. She hung up, mind racing. Why would Marcus specifically request her company? The familiarity she'd been feeling all day suddenly felt ominous. Was he some kind of corporate spy? A journalist looking for an exposé? Sarah prided herself on being thorough. She opened her browser and searched for Marcus Wilson Engineer Chicago. Several results appeared. LinkedIn profiles, academic papers from years ago, community service awards. Nothing suspicious. She refined her search, Marcus Wilson Engineer Water Purification. The results showed his name on several patents and research papers from prestigious journals. His credentials were real and impressive. So why was he driving cars for a living? She searched again, Marcus Wilson Leukemia Daughter Fundraiser. This search yielded several local news stories. One caught her eye, a small feature from 2 years ago about a father who ran a marathon while carrying a 40-pound backpack of water to raise awareness for both childhood cancer and global water crises. The accompanying photo showed Marcus, exhausted but triumphant, crossing a finish line with a bald little girl waiting in his arms. The article mentioned that Marcus had left his engineering career to care for his daughter and had been working odd jobs ever since, while continuing to volunteer and fundraise. Sarah leaned back in her chair, guilt washing over her for suspecting ulterior motives. Yet she still couldn't shake the feeling that she knew him from somewhere. On a hunch, she searched one more term, Marcus Wilson Hero. The first result made her blood run cold. Local engineer saves woman from drowning, disappears before being identified. The article was dated 15 years earlier. Sarah clicked on it with trembling fingers, knowing what she would find even before the page loaded. The story described how a young woman had been driving along Lake Shore Drive during a violent storm when her car hydroplaned, crashed through a barrier, and plunged into Lake Michigan. A passerby, later identified as Marcus Wilson, had immediately dove into the freezing water, broken the car window, and pulled the unconscious woman to safety before performing CPR. Once paramedics arrived, he had quietly left the scene without giving his full name. The rescued woman was Sarah Evans, then a graduate student at Northwestern University. Sarah stared at the screen, memories flooding back. The accident had left her with a concussion and hypothermia, but the doctors had told her she would have died without the immediate intervention of the mysterious Good Samaritan. She'd tried to find him afterward to thank him, but he had disappeared. And today, he had driven her around the city, never once mentioning their connection. Sarah grabbed her coat and keys. The agency had refused to give her Marcus's contact information, but she remembered something, the hospital fundraiser the nurse had mentioned. On the hospital website, she quickly found the upcoming events. Next Saturday, a children's cancer benefit featuring games, activities, and a special puppet show by volunteer Marcus Wilson. The community center was decorated with colorful balloons and streamers when Sarah arrived the following weekend. Children ran around in face paint while parents bid on silent auction items. Sarah felt distinctly out of place in her casual clothes. She couldn't remember the last time she'd worn jeans in public. She spotted him immediately, setting up a small puppet stage in the corner. His daughter, recognizable from the photos, was helping, handing him puppets from a large duffel bag. Sarah approached slowly, heart pounding. Marcus looked up as she neared, recognition and then surprise crossing his face. "Ms. Evans," he said, standing. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Sarah, please," she corrected. "And I wanted to see this famous puppet show for myself." Emma looked between them curiously. "Are you my dad's boss now? He had an interview at your company yesterday." Sarah smiled at the girl. "Not exactly. I'm Sarah. You must be Emma. I got your drawing, it was very sweet."